Hello everyone, our presentation today is going to be on FERPA, so really important information today that we're going to learn about. So what is FERPA? So FERPA is a federal law that protects the confidentiality of student information. FERPA prohibits release of educational records without consent of parents or the eligible student. Under FERPA, school districts must maintain confidentiality of all personally identifiable information and education records related to students. So the most important things to know about FERPA. FERPA gives parents and adult age students some rights to the privacy of the student education record. Under FERPA, adult age students are those who have reached the age of 18 or who attend a post-secondary school even though they're not 18 yet. For example, a 17-year-old who is enrolled in college would be considered an adult age. Also under FERPA, schools may disclose directory information without consent, but they are required to allow parents and eligible student a reasonable amount of time to request that the school does not disclose directory information about them. So who is granted under FERPA? So parents are granted rights on behalf of their children. Rights transferred to students when they turn 18 years old or they attend a post-secondary institution. Parents who claim their children as dependent on their taxes retain their rights as well. So what rights does FERPA provide? FERPA gives parents and eligible students the right to prevent the disclosure of personally identifiable information from their educational record without consent, access to review and inspect student education records, and also request correction of these education records. So what are education records? So education records, they're directly related to a student. They are maintained by the school, maintained by a third-party vendor on behalf of the school, and FERPA prohibits release of education records without consent of parents or the eligible student. So example of some educational records are student grades, immunization and health records maintained by the school, discipline records, student progress reports, academic or physical testing results, grade point average, or attendance records. So what is not part of the educational records? Private records a teacher makes during the course of teaching, law enforcement or campus security records created and maintained by law enforcement for certain reason, employment records, alumni records, grades on peer graded papers before they're recorded. Some common example of directory information are student's name, address and phone numbers, date and place of birth, major and field of study, participation in officially recognized activity or sports, weight, height of athletic team members, dates of attendance, degree awards received, most recent previous educational institution attended by the student, email address, photograph, grade level, and enrollment status. So some important FERPA facts. FERPA applies to all schools that receive federal funding for any program administered by the Department of Education. Access to student records should only be allowed if the requesting agency has a valid court order or subpoena in compliance with FERPA or immigration law or regulations. SAT data collected during test taking is subject to FERPA requirements, and it is not required to be turned over to authorities by school officials. So how does FERPA impact your classroom? So be careful with the technology that you use in your classroom. Don't use a website that requires your student to enter personal information unless it has been approved by your department supervisor. And always continue to evaluate the technology that you and your students are using in the classroom. Keep any student data that you have secure. Store your student data information using the our data management system. Don't email information to any unverified parent email addresses. Keep any physical graded materials or grade books in a secure and safe place. And don't discuss any student information with other people. Responding to access requests. You may communicate education record information to students' parents, but be careful that you know students' legal guardians and who they are. If you ever receive a request to inspect or review an educational records that you do not have access to, always talk to your administrator. Surveillance cameras in school. Surveillance cameras have become one of the cornerstones of school safety and security plans. School districts should notify the school community through policies, statements, and handbook that cameras are located throughout the school property, and individuals should anticipate having their images captured. Under FERPA, images of students captured on surveillance recordings qualify as education records when photos or videos is directly related to a student and is maintained by the educational institution. School surveillance recordings are often the subject of public records requested by the media, citizen groups, or third party. Recordings that qualify as FERPA protected education records are expected from the disclosure requirements of open record laws. Parent access to recordings. So school districts commonly receive requests from parents to view surveillance recordings capturing images of their child. So when a surveillance recording qualifies as an education record, it must be disclosed to the parents of the student for whom it is an education record. Law enforcement access to recordings. So school districts often frequently receive requests from law enforcement to have access to surveillance recordings that capture students' misconduct. So unless the recording is created and maintained by a school's law enforcement unit, schools are prohibited from disclosing such recordings without having secure written consent from the parent of the students to whom the recording directly relates. So some exceptions are health issues, when a student is having some health issues, safety emergencies, response to court orders, and a subpoena. It is also important for school officials to involve legal counsel in these conversations and use these collaborations as an opportunity to clarify expectations regarding information and recording sharing. So who enforces FERPA? FERPA is administered by the Family Policy Compliance Office in the Department of Education. And if a parent or eligible student files a FERPA complaint against our school, the FPCO may investigate our school's procedures to determine what action should be taken. So here are some ways to ensure that our school is FERPA compliant. Let's raise awareness, right? Making sure all employees are aware of FERPA. Confirm that FERPA applies to you. FERPA applies to any schools that receives federal funding. Know the rights, protection, and exceptions. Every school employee, we must learn, understand, and comply with FERPA. Choose compliant vendors. Let's choose third-party vendors that comply with FERPA. Train all employees yearly. We want to provide training to all of our employees and all of our teachers. Implement compliant policies and procedures. Implementing FERPA compliant policies and procedures make it easier for all of us to comply as well. Encrypt files and emails. This adds extra layer of protection for all teachers and employees. Implement other prevention tools. There are tools in place to help the school comply with FERPA guidelines. Disclosures. Assume all information is directly related to a student is part of that student's educational record and therefore cannot be disclosed without written consent. But FERPA allows a few specific exceptions, like other educators, academic coaches, or tutors. And also use your judgment. Your student safety is our priority, and FERPA allows for necessary disclosures in time of emergency, such as student allergies or with paramedics, or if a student is in some sort of a shock if they're having a health issue. FERPA permits a few other disclosures. However, it is unlikely that you will encounter some of those in your classroom. So if you are asked to share protected information that seems reasonable to disclose, always ask for advice and speak to an administrator. So what to do if you are confused? Talk to your colleagues, supervisors, administrator, and always ask if you are unsure before disclosing any kind of information. Thank you very much.